What up, guys? The Bench Buddies are back with our college basketball Week 10 top 25. As always, I have Ty, the college analyst, in the building. But before we get into it, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button down below. Get us to 500 subscribers. We'll be doing another giveaway with more autographed items. So all you have to do is hit that subscribe button to be subscribed. But before we get into it, we got to talk about the rankings from before. Obviously, we're going to kind of go through this really quick here because it's the top 25 from the past month, I think it is. So, you got here, and you got another list here. I mean, you can see some very consistent things up at the top. The top 10 really isn't interchangeable, and then the bottom five kind of is the same. And then you can see this was last week's as well. So you had a few teams jumping in, a few falling out. Kentucky's free falling. But we will go to the drop from the rankings and Ty out of these four. Which ones are you kind of surprised here to see either fall out or, be in this position?
I think you got to say Kentucky. I mean, Indiana's been playing pretty bad lately, but obviously they have a couple injuries, so I think they'll get it together. But I mean, I don't know what the excuse is for Kentucky this year. 2 years ago they missed the tournament. Last year, obviously first round exit, and now this year underperforming again. So I think it might be time to hit the panic button there for Kentucky.
Yeah, for me, I got to go with New Mexico. Started off really hot, and then instantly lost two straight games to go to 14-2. So, they're going to have to get some soul searching back here because, it is always tough to rebound after your first loss of the year. But two in a row, that's a big struggle. And then we'll move to the others receiving votes, and Indiana stays. And then you have Marquette just missing out, Northwestern, Clemson, and San Diego State as well. And, I'll pass this one over to you here. Which one of these teams do you think could be jumping back into the rankings next week?
I don't know if they'll jump in, but I think Northwestern is just a huge surprise. They were okay last year, and then all their good players transferred out, and now they're a good team. So I don't know what happened there. I don't know if they just lost some bad vibes last year, but I would look out for them. They just beat Indiana on the road, so they look like a top half Big Ten team so far.
For me, I got to go with Clemson. Last year, Clemson was a popular pick to, outperform what everyone's expectations, and they didn't do it. And I think this year they came in with less expectations and a quiet track record, going through it, breezing through it. And then here they are pulling off some big wins early in the ACC, have a decent record so far. And if they keep reeling off a few big wins here and there in the ACC, this team can find themselves ranked. But we'll jump into the rankings, and we got Baylor at 25. And this team has kind of hit the panic button already in the Big 12. They're 0-3 in the Big 12. Lost two games last week to TCU and K-State, who you will find on our rankings this week. But this is just surprising from Scott Drew and company. Baylor, they don't seem like they get off to these kind of starts in Big 12 play. Normally it's the other way around. They dominate early and then have a fluke loss here and there. But this year, it doesn't seem like that is the case. And they really have to get it together quick because these three guards play, George and Flagler at least, have been playing really good. But outside of those two, they need some help off the bench.
At 24, we got Missouri, a team that no one has really talked about this year after they got blown out at home by Kansas, but a big win or a tough loss this week against Arkansas. They had the lead almost the whole game and blew it. But still, that's a road loss to a really good team. So I think they can rebound from that. But a tough week here, two road games, kind of middle of the pack teams, but it's still tough to win on the road. So I think we'll learn more about them this week.
23, we got the Duke Blue Devils, and this team is coming off an ugly loss, to say the least, by NC State by 24 points on the road. And then they escaped Boston College by one. So this team could be hitting the panic button a little early as well. John Shire in his first year of coaching is doing a pretty solid job, I would say. Obviously, when you have Filipowski, it's going to be very easy to have a successful season. But the one thing for me is Jeremy Roach, I thought would be a bigger performer so far this year, only averaging 12 a game. I think he needs to get that up to 15 by the time this year is over for Duke really to have a successful year, not only in the ACC, but maybe a good tournament run as well.
We got Florida Atlantic, not Florida, not Florida State. We got Florida Atlantic here at number 22, a 14-1 start to the season with their only loss at Ole Miss. A couple upset wins early in the season, including Florida winning at Florida. So this is a team that I don't think you've heard anyone bring them up, but I think they're currently like an 11 or 12 seed. They're going to be dangerous in the first, maybe even second round of the tournament this year. And they could even be an at-large team when it's all said and done because they might only lose 2 or 3 games all year. The way they're playing, obviously a pretty weak conference there in the Conference USA, but this is a pretty good team, and I think they're going to start to earn some respect here going forward.
21, we have another team that is earning some respect, Charleston Cougars, and they're moving up to 21 here. And, AP has them at, I believe it's 22. So, everyone's showing love here. And their only loss was to North Carolina early in the year, but since then they have just been on a tear. But I think their biggest task ahead of them is this week, actually, at UNC Wilmington, the best team in their conference. They're 14-3. And obviously going on the road in a conference is always tough. But these guys, have just been getting it done. Very fundamentally sound team, coached very well. And it's going to be interesting to see how the season plays out for these Cougars.
At 20, we got Wisconsin, a team who's they have some good wins this year, but they've really struggled to a lot of their wins in conference against some middle of the pack teams. 3-point win over Minnesota, who is probably the worst team in the Big Ten. I don't think that's really controversial, and that's a game that they maybe should have lost. So I think, I mean, they're never a team that really blows teams out, but it's still a little alarming the way they've struggled in some of these games, and it finally caught up to them this weekend at Illinois, and Illinois had been struggling. So I think it's back to the drawing board for Wisconsin. A really tough week here. I know it's a home game, but you get Michigan State, who's always tough, and then they got to go to Assembly Hall. So I think even 1-1 this week, and you got to be somewhat satisfied if you're Wisconsin, but they need more consistent scoring because they're struggling on offense this year.
19, we have the Providence Friars. And if you guys have been with us since day one last year, you know that these Friars have been the team that I just loved last year, and fitting to find them back in almost the same position as last year. A very strong start, not only overall, but in Big East play, 6-0 and leading the conference by half a game. And they're racking up some solid wins along the way. And right now, I think you can say that besides UConn, this team might be the second best team in the conference, maybe Xavier as well. The Friars, it seems like they have found something in the water there on campus. Like this team has just looked very good last year, this year. And can they keep the magical run going that they have found?
We got Auburn here at 18. This is a team that I really can't figure out this year. They put up one really good performance and then just completely lay an egg the next game. And it's pretty much been like that all year. Although they're still 12-3, they still have a lot of talent. They have two guards that can give you 20 each in a game, and they can go 0 for 9 each in a game. They're very inconsistent. And that's kind of why this team is so up and down just because they have such inconsistent guard play. I think that could come back to bite them in March. But right now, they are coming off a big win over Arkansas, and they have a solid ranking, doing well in the SEC. So can't talk down on them too much yet.
17, I got the Miami Hurricanes, and they had a very ugly loss to Georgia Tech on the road. And that's why this team is falling just a little bit. But I'm not too concerned with this Hurricane team. I think they should rebound nicely, at least the first game against Boston College. And then obviously we saw Duke lose to NC State bad last week. So that could be a tough game. But this Hurricanes team has been very good through the first 15 games they've played. And, if they keep playing at this pace, they are for sure going to be a tournament team that could make some noise relatively around the 6 and 5 seed.
We got Arkansas, another inconsistent SEC team. They come in at 16 this week, coming off that loss to Auburn on the road. Barely scraped out a win at home over Missouri. But this team has been really up and down, but they're also very young. So I think there is still a lot of upside for them because typically with these young teams, you see them kind of put it together in late February and in March. So I think if they can just continue to stay above water here, ranked somewhere between 11 and 25. I think they are going to be set up well come March once their freshmen start to grow up because there is a ton of talent on this team. And if they can beat Alabama at home this week, I think that'll be a big confidence boost. And I still think Arkansas is going to be really dangerous later on, even if it doesn't look like it right now.
At 15, we have Virginia moving back a little bit. This was just because they lost to Pitt by 3. And Pitt is a very good team, though. Very under the radar team as well in the ACC. So give them a little credit for beating Virginia here. But this team got off to a very hot start. You can even see them at number 1 in our rankings this year, as they were at one point very good. But they have slowly fallen back into about the middle of the range here of our rankings and even in ACC play too. And their big question mark is can they hang with the big teams that are all ahead of them? Because most of their losses, I think all three of their losses have been to teams. Well, two of their losses have been to teams that are ahead of them in these rankings right now. That's going to be their big question moving forward is can they hang with those big time teams?
We got another team that no one expected this year, Iowa State coming in number 14. Remember last year they weren't supposed to do anything. They had won 2 games the year before, ended up in the top 10 at one point. Uh, kind of struggled the rest of the year, but still made the Sweet 16 last year. And now they're doing it again. Once again, it's with their defense this year, holding teams consistently to 60 or even under 60 in their wins. Last week they had a big win at Oklahoma and then another big win at TCU, who I thought was a really good team. So I think once again, you got to give Iowa State credit after no one expected them to do anything this year. If they can beat Texas Tech and not even beat Kansas, but if they can go in there and compete at Kansas, I think this team is going to be set up really well as the season goes on.
At 13, TCU's moving up one spot. And this is the biggest week they're probably going to have all year, going on the road to face Texas and then at home against K-State. But they did really good last week, beating Baylor by 1 on the road. And then they lost by 2 at home to Iowa State, which obviously Ty just talked about. So not a bad loss, especially if it's an in-conference loss to a ranked team. But TCU had high expectations coming into the year, lose their first game, and then I think everybody wrote them off kind of like they did for Florida State. But this team rebounded nicely. I think they ripped off 12 straight wins. I think actually 13 straight wins after they lost that first game, and here they are rebounding off another loss. And how do you get rewarded? Going into Texas, who obviously fired Chris Beard and still is playing some good basketball. So TCU Texas should be a great game on Tuesday.
At number 12, we have Kansas State. And the theme of the rankings is teams that were not supposed to do anything this year who are just lighting it up. Kansas State, another one of those teams, 14-1, and they had maybe the best week any teams had all season. They beat Texas and Baylor both on the road. They put up 116 on Texas, and I think the Baylor game they almost scored 100 even in overtime. But either way, this offense can light up any team in the country. If you can score 116 on Texas. I know Chris Beard's not there, but that's a Chris Beard defense. So that's pretty impressive what they did. And, this team's coming off firing their head coach. So I, for one, didn't expect them to be good at all. Now all of a sudden they look like a top 10 team. So we'll see if they can keep it up this week. Maybe it was just, one really hot, fluky week, or maybe this is just a really good basketball team, but we'll find out here coming up.
11, another good basketball team is the Xavier Musketeers. And I think they're the biggest surprise so far in the Big East. Obviously, Providence as well. It seems like they never have gotten over that hump in the Big East. They've always been relatively okay, but nothing too crazy. And I think this year is the coming out party. They beat Nova last year, which is, always been troubles for them. Beat them last week on the road by 8. And, Nova isn't the best this year, but hey, you got to take your small wins when you can get them. But it's going to be interesting to see the Big East play out moving forward in these next couple months.
And back into the top 10 is Gonzaga, a team who's not quite at the level that they usually are. But, they play in the West Coast Conference. They have a couple good wins. And this is really just a product of everyone else losing because that's how this season has gone. They still have some good wins over Michigan State, for example. I mean, they don't quite have the resume that they have in past years where they've been just the number one team the whole year. And they could lose a couple games this year in the West Coast Conference. They struggled twice this week with middle of the pack teams in that conference. So wouldn't be surprised if you see Gonzaga maybe lose 2 to 3 games this year in conference. I don't see them just running through it like usual. But, at the end of the year, they're still going to be a top 4 seed and they're still going to be a dangerous team in March. Maybe this is the year they finally get to the Final Four again.
At 9, Arizona's fallen back a little bit after they lost to a very bad Washington State team at home by 13. This is a fluke game for them. Obviously, they should rebound well this week in a trip to Oregon. And, Arizona was probably going to be number 1, I think, in our rankings, possibly, just because of how dominant they've been. But then that loss just kind of pivoted them the wrong way. This Wildcat team is for sure one of the favorites, if not the favorite in the Pac-12 right now. And I expect them to, get that 3-2 record in the Pac-12 up a lot higher.
And at number 8, we have Texas. And this is a team who I see, I'm not going to say they're going to plummet, but I just don't see them playing at a top 10 level the rest of the year. They already have been struggling a little bit here since Chris Beard has not been in the mix. Now, obviously, he's been fired. And that Kansas State loss was, I think it was just embarrassing, giving up 116. As a defensive team, that's just something that should never happen, especially at home. And I think you're going to see a couple more performances like that out of Texas. Chris Beard was a top 5 coach in college basketball, maybe even higher than that. So that's a huge loss now that he's not there. And they still have a lot of talent, but they're just not the same team without him. So I would not be surprised if TCU goes in there and beats them. But even if they don't, I think Texas, their ceiling now is an Elite Eight or a Sweet 16. I don't really see them getting beyond that.
At 7, you got the UCLA Bruins, another Pac-12 team, and they squeaked out the win against USC and by a clutch 3-pointer with 6 seconds left in that game to win by 2 and to keep them in the top 10 here. They played Pac-12, second place team, Utah, this week at home. So that's going to be a huge game just for those Pac-12 standings and for Utah as well. If they can get that win, you might see them squeak into others receiving votes or even jump into our rankings. But yeah, to talk about Jaquez and Jaden Clark, the two fundamental players for this Bruin team to make them go. And they got to keep playing well for the Bruins to really not have a, another Cinderella magical run to the Final Four, but to maybe even have a decent run to the Final Four. They've done it once before, so why can't they do it again?
At number 6, we have UConn. Another tough loss this week. That makes it back to back now for the Huskies. But I think they were kind of due to have a couple lackluster performances after starting 15-0 this year. They're still a really good team, but every team has those off nights. It seems like they hadn't really had that yet. So I think they should bounce back. If they can win at Marquette, then they'll be right back where they want to be. Obviously, St. John's at home. You'd expect them to get that win. So I still think they're the front runner in the Big East, and I would not be surprised if they're a 1 seed, 2 seed at worst come March.
At 5, you got Bama jumping in, and they blew out Ole Miss and Kentucky by 20 plus. So obviously, that deserves recognition. And the biggest SEC test for them is this week. LSU is a very good team still, as they were in our rankings last week. And you're going on the road to face Arkansas, which, to face the Must Bus at home is always a tough competition. And this might be the year that they make the run to the Final Four. They've been so close these last few years, but can they take it over the top this year is going to be the big question mark looming around the program.
At number 4, we have Tennessee. I think they're kind of flying below the radar for being ranked as high as they are. But a lot of that is because they've gotten off to a kind of cupcake SEC schedule, just the way it lined up. Obviously, they will play the top teams in the league, but so far, I mean, they played Mississippi State, South Carolina, 2 subpar teams, but they did to them exactly what they should do. They absolutely blew them out, winning by 34 and 43. So this team, I think, is really dangerous. I think they're a Final Four level team, maybe even beyond that. And I think they're going to compete with Alabama to win the SEC. I think it comes down to those 2 teams. But Tennessee can score with a lot of different guys, 4 guys averaging double digits. So I think they're going to be a really tough out. And this week, I think you got to expect them to win both of those games and get to 5-0.
At 3, you got Kansas moving up 1. And this team, right now is, I would say, probably the best team in the country, the way they are playing. And they did escape Texas Tech on the road by 3, which kind of worries me a little bit, but it's always tough to win on the road in Big 12 play. But they got it done, and that's all that matters because, when we get to March, no one's going to look at how close the score was in a win. A win is a win. And they have a big homestand this week. Obviously, the Oklahoma game should be a little bit of a breeze pass over to say. And then Iowa State, obviously, they are on fire right now. So that's going to be a very intriguing matchup this weekend.
At number 2, we have the Houston Cougars. Not at number 1. We're keeping them here at number 2. And a lot of this is just because of their schedule. The American typically is a decent mid-major conference, but this year it's Houston, who's obviously very good, and a middle of the pack Memphis team who's like a 8-9 seed, and then nobody else. So they are just going to dominate in that conference. I think they'll be at worst 16-2 in the conference. So you're going to see a lot of just lopsided wins for Houston as long as they keep taking care of business. And, I think the path to a 1 seed is about as easy as you can have it right now for Houston because they beat enough really solid teams already where they can just, coast through their conference and find themselves at a 1 seed. Their ceiling has to be championship with the talent that they have on this team.
And at one, we are keeping the Purdue Boilermakers. And this for me was speaking more of when was it going to happen? They lost at home to Rutgers last Monday, but rebounded with two very good wins on the road against Ohio State and Penn State. So I didn't overreact a little bit here. At least we didn't overreact and move Purdue out of top spot because this team has been clear cut, probably the second best team in the country, but rankings wise, you got to put them at one just because they play better teams. Like you said, Houston doesn't play nearly as better teams as Purdue will. And Purdue, shows their dominance every single night. With Zach Edey obviously taking up so much space on the floor. And, he's going to probably win a lot of awards this year for Player of the Year, Center of the Year, All Big Ten, and whatnot. And as long as he's healthy, then this Purdue team is going to click. And Fletcher Loyer has been a great piece to build around Zach Edey. He's been a great guard, averaging 12 a game. And I expect that to rise here as we get into Big Ten play and he really starts to figure it out down the stretch. But that's going to be it for our video this week. Make sure you guys come back next week as we will be doing our rankings as always and, see where your team ranks and see who came in and fell out of our rankings. But stay tuned for our March Madness predictions as well. We will be firing those back up on the brackets and picking our winners and whatnot. So stay tuned. We're going to be getting those out to you in the next few weeks here. But until the next time, the Bench Buddies are out.
She never called back.